There are places in the galaxy where the Emperor's light does not reach. Places where the warp bleeds into reality, where Daemons walk openly upon corrupted soil, where the very laws of nature bend to the whims of the dark gods. These are the Daemon worlds, scattered throughout the Eye of Terror like poisoned jewels in a crown of madness. This is the story of Justicar Alaric's darkest trial, his imprisonment on such a world, and of how faith endured even in the deepest pit of damnation. Our tale begins on Sarthis Majoris, a fuel world whose refineries fed the engines of the Imperial Navy. The 13th Black Crusade had erupted from the Eye of Terror, and Chaos forces had made landfall on the planet's southern polar cap. The Hathran armoured cavalry held a mountain pass against the advancing horde, their tanks dug into the ice, their men huddled beneath greatcoats against the freezing wind, and with them stood Justicar Alaric and 4 Grey Knights. It was all the Inquisition could spare. The Eye of Terror demanded everything the Ordo Malleus had, and Sarthis Majoris received only a handful of Daemon hunters to face an army of the damned. Alaric's squad included brothers Holvarn and Devorn, veterans who had fought beside him on Volcanis Ultor and Cheronia, along with brothers Thane and Visical, newer additions to replace those who had fallen. The attacks came nightly. Cultists threw themselves at the walls, mad things with flayed skin and inhuman tongues. Red lightning struck from the heavens. Soldiers went mad and turned on their brothers. The enemy wanted the Hathran line bruised and tender before the final assault. When that assault came, it came with a champion. Duke Venaliter rode at the head of the Chaos Horde, a warrior in armour so intricate it seemed to writhe with images of skulls and burning thrones. His face was pale perfection, his eyes like black diamonds, his teeth filed to ebony fangs. He had been a man once, before the blood god found him. Now he was something else entirely, something that had knelt at the foot of Khorne's skull mountain and tasted the blood of the god himself. Alaric saw only one chance to save Sarthis Majoris. The Chaos army would collapse without its leader. If he could reach Venaliter and kill him, the invasion might still be stopped. He abandoned his position on the line and led his Grey Knights in a desperate charge toward the enemy commander. The duel that followed was the most brutal of Alaric's life. Venaliter moved like chained lightning, his sword a blur of star-forged metal. Tendrils of gore reached from his armour to snare Alaric and drag him down. The champion's power was beyond anything Alaric had faced, a gift from Khorne himself, and though the Grey Knight fought with everything he had, it was not enough. Venaliter caught Alaric by the throat and lifted him like a trophy, ready to slice him open as a sacrifice to the blood god. But even then, Alaric fought, kicking the champion in the face, tearing free for one more moment of defiance. In the end, it only delayed the inevitable. When Alaric regained consciousness, he was in chains. The first thing he felt was the absence. The psychic core that had protected his soul for decades was muted, deadened by the collar of black iron locked around his neck. A collar of Khorne, forged to suppress the powers of psykers, to leave them naked and vulnerable before the blood god's servants. Without his psychic wards, Alaric could not feel the warp, could not sense Daemons, could not draw upon the faith that was as much weapon as shield. He was hanging from his wrists in a cage suspended above a sea of blood. Thousands of bodies writhed in the crimson depths below, tended by hulking Daemons with whips. Other cages held other prisoners, humans weeping and dying, alien creatures, half-glimpsed freaks whose forms defied description. Above him, cliffs of rotted black flesh were riddled with tunnels, and the sky burned with colours that should not exist. He was on a Daemon world. He was in the Eye of Terror. The world was called Drakaasi, and it belonged to Khorne. Its cities were built from weapons, its temples stank of blood, and its rulers competed endlessly for the favour of the blood god through ever more elaborate spectacles of slaughter. The greatest of these rulers was Lordy Bondrake, a creature that had once been a dragon but was now something far worse, a Daemon prince whose palace was built from the skull of some titanic beast. Duke Venaliter served Bondrake, and he had brought Alaric and brother Holvarn to Drakaasi as prizes. Grey Knights were rare on any world on a Daemon world. They were treasures beyond price. The hunters of Daemons would be made to fight and die for the blood god's glory. Alaric was taken aboard the Hecatomb, Venaliter's sailing ship, which plied the blood rivers of Drakaasi, carrying slaves to the arenas. In the ship's cramped cells, he found Holvarn, similarly chained and collared. The 2 Grey Knights were still alive, still defiant, but their situation was dire beyond measure. "Where do you think they are taking us?" Holvarn asked. Are we to be sacrifices? Alaric looked at the chains binding his wrists. I think they have greater plans for us. A simple knife across the throat is rarely enough to sate the blood god. They will have something more elaborate in store. The arenas of Drakaasi were monuments to slaughter, vast amphitheatres built from blades and bones, where slaves fought for the entertainment of Daemon lords and howling crowds. The greatest arena was the Elazadne, and it was there that Alaric first witnessed the horror that awaited him. He was forced to fight, not against Daemons, though they were plentiful, but against other slaves, other prisoners, humans and mutants and aliens, all thrown together in a pit of blood and sand. The crowd screamed for death, and death was delivered in abundance. In those first terrible days, Alaric learned the rules of survival on Drakaasi. He fought alongside unlikely allies Garth, a convicted murderer whose skill with blades was matched only by his lack of conscience, Urquhart, a former Imperial Navy lieutenant who had maintained his faith despite everything, and Kelhedros, an Eldar warrior who had somehow survived on the Daemon world for decades. He also made enemies. Skarhadoth was the champion of Lordy Bondrak's arena stables, a massive serpentine creature with 4 arms and a body that ended in a snake's tail. Its tiny red eyes gleamed with malice, and its fork-tongued mouth smiled as it slaughtered opponent after opponent. It was Skarhadoth who killed Holvarn. The battle happened so fast that Alaric could barely follow it. Holvarn fought with desperate skill, but Skarhadoth was faster, stronger, blessed by the blood god with supernatural power. The champion caught Holvarn by the throat and leg, lifted him overhead like a trophy, and tore him in 2. Alaric screamed. He tried to reach his brother, to avenge him, but a wall of spears burst from the arena floor to block his path. He could only watch as Skarhadoth threw the 2 halves of Holvarn's body into the crowd, where spectators fought to tear chunks of flesh from the corpse. The hollow that opened in Alaric could only be filled with revenge. It was not a choice. It was an unbreakable rule that had to be obeyed. Holvarn had to be avenged, but revenge would have to wait. Alaric was a slave, weaponless and collared, surrounded by enemies on a world where the very air was poison to his soul. If he was to survive long enough to avenge Holvarn, he would have to be patient. He would have to be cunning. He would have to become something he had never been before. They called him Alaric the Betrayed. The crowds loved him, this fallen grey knight who fought with such fury, who killed so efficiently, who seemed to embody all the rage that Khorne adored. They did not understand that his rage was directed at them, at their world, at everything Drakaasi represented. They thought he was becoming one of them. Duke Venalita thought so too. The champion visited Alaric in his cell, speaking of the blood god's gifts, of the power that could be his if only he would bow before Khorne's altar. A few drops of blood, Venalita said. That was all the god required. He will have to wring them out of me, Alaric replied. Venalita smiled. There is something noble in you. The Emperor's lackeys taught you well, but you had a duty towards Sarthis Majoris, did you not? Do you know what we did to that planet? Alaric could not answer. We separated the men from the women, and we killed the women in front of the men. We killed them badly. Then we let the men fight back. Half of them wanted revenge, and the other half just wanted to die. So many of them were begging the blood god to take them that I made a new army from them and marched them on to the next city. Your duty was to prevent that, Justicar. I think it is fair to say that you failed. Your words cannot sway me, Venalita. I am a grey knight. Not anymore. You became something else, something less, the moment I was able to take you alive. But Venalita was wrong. Alaric was still a grey knight, even without his armour, even with his powers suppressed, even on a world where the Emperor's name was a curse. His faith had not died with his capture. It had grown stronger, tempered by suffering into something harder than ceramite, and he was not alone. Among the slaves of the Hecatomb, Alaric found others who had not surrendered their souls, Urquhart and his faithful Imperial citizens who maintained their devotion despite everything. The Hathran prisoners from Sarthis Majoris, soldiers who remembered their oaths, even Kelhedros the Eldar, who fought alongside Alaric for reasons the Grey Knight did not fully understand. Venalator had other plans for Alaric. Deep within the Hecatomb was a hidden chamber, a temple of gold and crystal where a daemon called Razazel the Cunning was imprisoned. Razazel had once been a prophet, worshipped by millions before his cult was consumed by chaos. Now he was bound to the ship, forced to serve Venalita's purposes. Venaliter wanted Alaric possessed. He wanted Rizazel's demonic intelligence to take control of the Grey Knight's body, creating a weapon that combined Space Marine strength with a Daemon's cunning. Such a creature would be unstoppable, a champion that could elevate Venaliter above all other lords of Drakaasi. But possession required the host's will to break first. Rizazel probed at Alaric's mind, searching for cracks, for weaknesses, for the doubt and despair that would let the Daemon slip inside. He found nothing. Alaric's faith was a wall of adamantine, and no matter how the Daemon battered against it, the wall held. "What do you truly desire?" Rizazel asked. "Revenge, conquest, redemption?" "I want to escape," Alaric said. "That is just a primitive need, no more elegant than hunger or thirst. What do you truly desire?" Alaric looked at the Daemon with cold eyes. "I desire to see this world burn." The Daemon laughed. "Now that is a desire I can understand. But you cannot burn a world with faith alone, Grey Knight. You will need allies, weapons, a plan. You will need to become something other than what you are. I am a Grey Knight. That will never change. We shall see." The opportunity came at Carnical's Games, the greatest spectacle of slaughter in Drakaasi's calendar. Champions from across the planet gathered to compete for the title of Supreme Gladiator, fighting their way up a pyramid of marble while crowds howled for blood. The winner would stand at the pinnacle and be proclaimed Khorne's chosen. But Alaric had other plans. With Kelhedros's help, he had been preparing for months. The Eldar had discovered that beneath Ibondrake's palace lay an ancient Imperial vessel, the Hammer of Daemons, a pilgrim ship that had crashed on the Daemon world centuries ago. Its engines were intact. If the slaves could reach it, they could escape. The revolt began during the games. While the champions fought on the pyramid, Kelhedros freed the Hathran prisoners from their cells beneath the arena. Urkar and his faithful seized the arming chambers. The greenskin slaves, brutal orcs who cared nothing for escape but loved violence for its own sake, provided the muscle. And Alaric fought his way to the top of the pyramid, where Skarhadoth waited. The serpentine champion was everything Alaric remembered: the glinting red eyes, the 4 arms carrying cleavers and shields, the massive body that moved with terrible grace. It had killed Holvan. It had torn his brother in two and bathed in his blood. "I have developed a taste for your kind," Skarhadoth hissed. Alaric said nothing. Words were for those who had time to spare. The fight was savage and brutal. 2 killers who had nothing left to lose. Skarhadoth struck with all 4 arms, its blades weaving patterns of death in the air. Alaric dodged and countered, every move calculated, every strike aimed at vital points. He had no psychic powers, no sacred weapon, nothing but his training and his hate. Skarhadoth caught him with a shield, knocking him sprawling. The champion reared up, ready to tear Alaric apart as it had torn apart Holvan. But Alaric had been waiting for this moment. He rolled to his feet, grabbed a fallen spear, and drove it upward into Skarhadoth's throat. The champion's eyes went wide. Its mouth opened, but only blood came out. Alaric twisted the spear and pulled, and Skarhadoth's head came away from its body in a fountain of gore. The crowd fell silent. Alaric stood at the top of the pyramid, holding the head of Ibondrake's champion, and for one moment the entire arena held its breath. Then the slaves attacked. What followed was chaos in the truest sense. The arena exploded into violence as slaves turned on their masters, as the crowd fought back, as the lords of Drakaasi realized that something had gone terribly wrong. Alaric led the Hathrans through the carnage, fighting toward Ibondrake's palace and the ship hidden beneath it. Duke Venaliter pursued them, enraged that his prize was slipping away. The champion cut through anyone who stood between him and Alaric, his star-forged blade leaving a trail of corpses. But the slaves were too many, the confusion too great, and by the time Venaliter reached the palace, Alaric had already found the Hammer of Daemons. The ship was intact, its engines cold but functional, its systems waiting for the command to wake. The Hathran prisoners flooded aboard, taking positions at stations they barely understood, following the instructions of the few who had served on starships before their capture. But before he could leave, Alaric had one more thing to do. He found his way to Ibondrake's trophy hall, where the Lord kept the war gear of his most prized kills. And there, displayed like relics, was his power armour, his storm bolter, his nemesis halberd. Venaliter found him there, surrounded by the weapons of a Grey Knight. "You think you can escape?" the champion snarled. "You think I will let you simply walk away from Drakaasi?" Alaric picked up his halberd. It felt right in his hands, like a part of himself that had been missing. "I think you will try to stop me. I think you will fail." The duel that followed was everything the first had not been. On Sarthis Majoris, Alaric had been unprepared for Venalita's power. Now he knew his enemy. He knew the tendrils that would reach from the champion's armor, the supernatural strength granted by the blood god, the speed that seemed to defy the laws of nature. And he knew that none of it mattered. Venalita had taken everything from him: his brothers, his freedom, his faith in a merciful universe. All that remained was the duty, and the duty did not end in death. The Nemesis halberd carved through Venalita's defenses, cutting through armor that had turned aside 1,000 blades. The champion staggered, blood flowing from wounds that should have been impossible. His sword shattered against the Grey Knight's weapon. His powers flickered and failed as the sacred symbols on Alaric's armor burned with holy light. "The blood god promised me victory," Venalita gasped. "The blood god lied," Alaric replied, and drove his halberd through the champion's chest. He left Venalita dying in the ruins of Ebondrake's palace as the hammer of Daemons roared to life. The ancient engines shook off centuries of dormancy, and the ship tore free from the bones that had imprisoned it, rising into the burning sky of Drakaasi. But Alaric did not stay aboard. He found a shuttle in the ship's flight deck and launched it into the void, setting a course away from the Daemon world. The Hathrans would find their own way, guided by Urkar's faith toward whatever promised land they sought. Alaric had a different destination in mind. He had to return to Titan. He had to report what had happened. He had to resume the war. Below him, Drakaasi tore itself apart. The slave uprising had sparked something larger, a civil war between the lords of the Daemon world. Arguthrax and Ebondrake clashed in the streets of Velscan, their armies slaughtering each other for reasons that had already been forgotten. The violence spread to every city, every temple, every blood river and mountain roost. Khorne laughed, for in the end, all the bloodshed served him. Duke Venalita died impaled on a sword in the wreckage of his ambitions. His ship, the Hecatomb, burned on a blood river, its prisoners freed, its holds empty. Everything he had built was ash and ruin. And Alaric, Justicar of the Grey Knights, flew toward the light of the Astronomicon, his faith unbroken, his duty unfulfilled. He had survived the Daemon world. He had avenged his brother. He had escaped from a prison that should have been inescapable. But he knew that his trials were not over. The 13th Black Crusade still raged, worlds still burned. Daemons still hungered for human souls. The war would never end. It was the nature of the universe, the price of existence in the grim darkness of the far future. But as long as there were Grey Knights to fight it, as long as there were men and women who held to their faith despite everything, the war would never be lost. Alaric removed the collar of Khorne from his neck. It had taken all his strength to break it. All his will focused on that single act of defiance. The metal shattered, and for the first time in months, he felt his psychic powers returning, the connection to the warp that was both his weapon and his shield. He was a Grey Knight again. He had never stopped being one. The shuttle carried him through the Eye of Terror, past demon worlds and warp storms, through dangers that would have destroyed any lesser vessel. But Alaric had survived worse. He had walked on Drakaasi and lived. He had fought chaos champions and emerged victorious. He had been to the deepest pit of damnation and climbed back out. The Emperor protects, even in the darkest places, and sometimes, through the faith and fury of his servants, he delivers. May you rest well, knowing that such faith exists. May the knowledge that even in the worst circumstances, the human spirit can endure bring you peace. And may the Emperor's light guide your dreams, as it guided Alaric through the darkness of the Eye. The Grey Knights continue their eternal vigil. Somewhere in the galaxy, Justicar Alaric fights on, his halberd carving through the enemies of mankind, his faith a beacon in the endless night. The Daemons fear him now, for he has proven that no prison can hold a true servant of the Emperor, that no torment can break a soul devoted to the light. He is the hammer of Daemons, and his work is never done.